The weak-bodied Romulans were abandoned and left to rot. Yet again, and only the carnivorous humans gave enough of a shit to try to save their frail alien asses. Captain Gabriel Collins cursed as he piloted his heavily armed gunship through the treacherous asteroid field known as the Romulan Graveyard. The veteran of the Earth Defense Force gritted his teeth, determined to rescue the high-ranking Romulan diplomat Ymir, whose distress signal emanated from deep within the graveyard's deadly embrace. For decades, the Romulans had been humanity's allies, sharing advanced technology in exchange for protection. But as humans rapidly rose to power, the Romulans grew resentful and bitter. Gabriel's mission was critical. If Ymir died, it could ignite a war between the two species, engulfing the galaxy in flames. Gabriel's sensors blared warnings as a massive Romulan battleship, the Varanus, emerged from behind a shattered moon, opening fire on his gunship. The captain realized with a sinking feeling that the Varanus wasn't here to rescue Ymir, but to ensure his death. Gabriel had to use every ounce of his skill and cunning to outmaneuver the Varanus, find Ymir's escape pod, and extract the diplomat before it was too late. The stakes couldn't be higher. If Gabriel failed, humanity would be dragged into a bloody war with the technologically superior Romulans, a conflict they might not survive. But if he succeeded, he could prevent countless deaths and prove that humans were more than just savage carnivores. They were the galaxy's last hope for peace and stability. With time running out and the odds stacked against him, Gabriel plunged deeper into the Romulan graveyard, ready to risk everything to save Ymir and protect the future of his species. Gabriel's heart raced as he maneuvered his gunship through the asteroid field, chasing after Ymir's damaged escape pod. The Varanus loomed behind them, its massive form filling his rear-view display. Gabriel cursed as the battleship launched a barrage of missiles, streaking towards his ship. He punched the throttle, pushing his engines to their limits. With seconds to spare, he managed to dock with Ymir's pod, the airlock sealing with a hiss just as the missiles slammed into his hull. The gunship shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring as critical systems failed. Gabriel rushed into the cargo bay, finding Ymir slumped in the escape pod, his robes soaked with dark green blood. The Romulan's breathing was shallow, his eyes barely open. Gabriel pulled out his medkit and began administering first aid, his hands steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Ymir, stay with me," Gabriel urged, applying pressure to the diplomat's wounds. "What happened? Who did this to you?" Ymir coughed, his voice weak. "It was Xandar. He betrayed us. He wants war with humanity. I had evidence, was going to expose him at the peace talks. But he found out. Attacked my ship." Gabriel's mind raced as he processed this information. A rogue Romulan faction, led by a warmongering warlord, seeking to sabotage the peace talks and plunge the galaxy into war. It was a nightmare scenario, one that he had to prevent at all costs. "We have to get you to safety," Gabriel said, helping Ymir to his feet. "Earth needs to know the truth." But as they stumbled towards the cockpit, Gabriel's comms crackled to life. It was a message from Earth, and the news it brought was devastating. The peace talks had been bombed, the Romulan ambassador killed, and worse, the Earth Defense Force believed that Gabriel was responsible. "Captain Collins, you are hereby ordered to surrender yourself for arrest," the message said, the voice cold and unforgiving. "You are charged with terrorism and the murder of the Romulan ambassador." Gabriel's blood ran cold. He had been framed, his mission twisted into an act of war, and with the Varanus closing in, he was now a fugitive, hunted by both his own people and the Romulans. He glanced at Ymir, who had collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, his face pale and drawn. Gabriel knew what he had to do. He had to find a way to escape the Romulan graveyard, clear his name, and expose Xandar's treachery. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he was the only one who could prevent the coming storm. Gabriel turned back to the controls, his jaw set with determination. He had faced impossible odds before, and he would do so again. For the sake of humanity, for the sake of peace, he would not fail. Gabriel's gunship slipped undetected past the Varanus, its advanced stealth tech keeping it off of Romulan sensors. Gabriel pushed the throttle to maximum, rocketing away from the graveyard and toward open space. He glanced back at Emir, who was recovering slowly in the co-pilot's seat. "We're clear of the graveyard," Gabriel said. "But Earth thinks I'm a terrorist and half the galaxy will be hunting us. Where do we go now?" Emir coughed, his voice still weak. "There's something else, Gabriel. Something worse than framing you for the bombing." Gabriel's stomach tightened. "What is it?" "Xandar. He's not just trying to start a war, he's built a superweapon, capable of destroying entire planets, and he's going to use it against Earth." Gabriel's blood ran cold. A weapon of that magnitude could wipe out billions in an instant. Where is this weapon? "Hidden, on a remote outpost near the edge of Romulan space. We have to find it, Gabriel, destroy it before Xandar can use it." Gabriel nodded, setting course for the outpost. They were racing against the clock now, with the Earth Defense Force on their tail and a madman threatening genocide. But as they neared the edge of Romulan territory, Gabriel's sensors picked up a small fleet of ships, moving to intercept them. The lead ship hailed them, and a fierce Romulan female appeared on the viewscreen. "I am Talon, leader of the resistance against Xandar. We know of his weapon and your mission to destroy it. Let us help you." Gabriel hesitated, glancing at Emir. Could they trust these rebels? But Emir nodded, and Gabriel knew they had little choice. They needed all the allies they could get. "Very well, Talon, we accept your help. But we need to move fast. The weapon is nearly ready, yes," Talon finished. "My spies report that Xandar plans to test it soon on an inhabited world." Gabriel's heart raced. They were running out of time. As the rebel ships fell into formation around his gunship, he pushed his engines to the limit, racing toward the distant outpost. But as they neared their target, Gabriel's sensors lit up with warnings. The outpost was heavily defended, bristling with gun emplacements and swarming with fighter patrols. And at its heart, a massive energy signature pulsed, the superweapon powering up for its first deadly test. Gabriel exchanged a grim look with Talon over the viewscreen. To reach that weapon, they'd have to fight their way through an army. Failure meant the death of billions. But Gabriel had never shied from impossible odds before, and with the fate of the galaxy in their hands, he knew he couldn't flinch now. Pulse rifle fire ripped through the air as Gabriel, Talon, and the Romulan rebel squad battled their way deeper into the heavily fortified Romulan outpost. Xandar's elite soldiers poured out from every corridor and blast door, their disruptor rifles spitting deadly green bolts. Gabriel dove behind a steel barricade. Just as a disruptor bolt sizzled past his head, he popped up and returned fire, downing 2 soldiers with precise shots to the head. "Push forward," Talon yelled over the din of battle, lobbing a plasma grenade down the corridor. It detonated with a blinding flash, vaporizing a group of soldiers. Gabriel and the rebels surged forward, fighting tooth and nail for every inch of ground. Automated turrets emerged from the walls and opened fire, forcing them to take cover. Gabriel ripped a turret from its housing with a burst of pulse fire and used it as a shield, charging forward and slamming it into a soldier's face. As they neared the superweapons control room, a towering figure emerged from the shadows. It was Xandar, clad in black body armor, his eyes glinting with malice. "You fools," Xandar sneered. "You have no idea what you're up against." "I know enough," Gabriel snarled, leveling his rifle at Xandar's head. "You're a traitor to your own people." Xandar laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Traitor? No, I'm a visionary. The Zorgons have shown me the true path to power. For centuries, they have been manipulating us, guiding us towards this moment. With their help, the Romulans will become the dominant force in the galaxy." Gabriel's eyes widened in shock. The Zorgons, a mysterious alien race that had been pulling the strings all along. It was a revelation that shook him to his core. "You're insane," Gabriel said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "The Zorgons will destroy us all." "No, they will elevate us," Xandar said, his voice rising with fervor. "And you, Gabriel Collins, will not live to see it." Xandar charged forward with superhuman speed, his fist slamming into Gabriel's chest and sending him flying backwards. Gabriel crashed into a wall, his rifle clattering to the floor. Xandar was on him in an instant, his hands wrapping around Gabriel's throat. Gabriel gasped for air, his vision turning red. He could hear Talon and the rebels fighting in the background, could feel the floor shaking as the superweapon's power core destabilized. With a desperate surge of strength, he brought his knee up into Xandar's groin, then head-butted him with a sickening crack. Xandar staggered back, his nose gushing blood. Gabriel pressed his advantage, raining blows down on the Romulan warlord with all his might. Xandar fought back with the strength of a madman, but Gabriel's fury was unrelenting. Finally, with a devastating uppercut, Gabriel sent Xandar crashing to the floor. He pinned the warlord down, his forearm pressing against Xandar's throat. Xandar laughed, blood bubbling from his lips. "You'll never stop them, human. The portal is nearly ready. Soon the Zorgon armies will flood into this galaxy, and all will kneel before them." Gabriel's blood ran cold. He looked up at Talon, who had just finished off the last of Xandar's soldiers. "The portal," Gabriel said urgently. "We have to destroy it." Talon nodded, her face grim. They fought their way into the control room, where a massive portal generator hummed with power. Talon and the rebels set to work planting explosives, while Gabriel raced to the control console. But Xandar had one last trick up his sleeve. With a triumphant roar, he slammed his fist down on a button, and the portal generator roared to life. A massive energy surge exploded outwards, tearing through the room like a hurricane. Consoles exploded, and debris rained down from the ceiling as the portal began to open, a swirling vortex of light and shadow. Gabriel hesitated, torn between staying to help Talon and warning the galaxy of the coming invasion. But Talon's eyes blazed with determination, and he knew she would not be swayed. He turned and ran, his heart pounding in his ears as the outpost shook itself apart around him. He barely made it to his ship before the explosions began, the rebel ships blasting away from the outpost as it erupted into a ball of white-hot plasma. Gabriel watched in horror as the outpost vanished, consumed by the fires of its own destruction. The portal was gone, and with it, any hope of stopping the Zorgon invasion. The galaxy was in mortal danger, and he was the only one who knew the truth. The weight of that knowledge settled on his shoulders like a lead weight. He leaned back in his pilot's chair, his mind racing. Earth needed to be warned. The Romulans needed to be warned. The entire galaxy needed to know the threat that loomed over them. But who would believe him? He was a fugitive, a traitor in the eyes of his own people. Gabriel's fist clenched as he stared out into the endless void of space. Somehow he had to find a way. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he would not rest until the Zorgons were defeated, no matter the cost. As the dust settled from the destruction of the Romulan outpost, Gabriel and his team emerged from the rubble, battered but alive. The Romulan rebels swarmed around them, cheering their victory over Xandar's forces. Talon clapped Gabriel on the shoulder. "You did it, human. You saved us all." Gabriel shook his head. "We did it together, all of us." Thymir limped over, supported by a rebel medic. The truth about Xandar's betrayal will be known. The Romulan people will demand justice. But their celebration was cut short by a sudden tremor that shook the ground beneath their feet. A rebel technician rushed over, his face pale. "The energy surge from the portal," he said. "It's awakened something ancient and powerful." Emir's eyes widened. "The Nexus, it can't be." Gabriel turned to him. "What's the Nexus?" "A Zorgon artifact, said to contain the consciousness of their greatest emperor. If it falls into the wrong hands..." "It could bring the Zorgons back to power," Talon finished grimly. Gabriel clenched his fists. "We can't let that happen. We have to find it before anyone else does." They boarded their ships and set course for the edge of Romulan space, following the faint energy trail left by the Nexus. As they approached an uncharted planet, Gabriel's sensors picked up another ship landing on the surface. "Looks like we're not the only ones after the Nexus," he said. They touched down in a dense jungle, the air thick with the scent of rotting vegetation. As they trekked through the undergrowth, Gabriel and Talon took point, their weapons at the ready. "I never thought I'd be fighting alongside a human," Talon said, slicing through a tangle of vines with her plasma blade. Gabriel grinned. Life's full of surprises. But as they pushed deeper into the jungle, they heard the unmistakable sound of Zorgon pulse rifles firing up ahead. Gabriel signaled for the team to take cover, but it was too late. A group of Zorgon warriors burst from the trees, their armor gleaming in the dim light. The team opened fire, but the Zorgons were too fast, too strong. Gabriel saw Talon go down, a pulse blast searing her leg. He rushed to her side, dragging her behind a fallen tree trunk. "I'm fine," she insisted, gritting her teeth against the pain. "Keep going." But the Zorgons were on them in seconds, their leader stepping forward with a cruel smile. He was a towering figure, his armor adorned with the skulls of his enemies. "Surrender the Nexus," he growled, "and I may spare your lives." Gabriel stood tall, his rifle aimed at the Zorgon's head. "I don't think so." The Zorgon chuckled, a low rumble that sent shivers down Gabriel's spine. "You really think you can stop us? The Zorgon Empire will rise again, and you will be nothing but dust beneath our feet." Gabriel's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the Zorgon moved with lightning speed, slamming the butt of his rifle into Gabriel's temple. The last thing he saw before the world went black was Talon's face, her eyes wide with fear. When Gabriel awoke, he found himself bound and gagged, lying on the floor of a Zorgon dropship. Talon was beside him, her leg hastily bandaged. The Zorgon leader stood over them, his eyes glinting with malice. "I am Zaan," he said, "and you will give me the location of the Nexus, or your friend here will die." Gabriel spat out his gag, his head throbbing. "I don't know where it is." Zaan smiled, a predator's grin. "You lie. But no matter, we will find it with or without your help." He turned to his warriors. "Prepare the mind probe. We will rip the knowledge from his brain." Talon struggled against her bonds, panic in her eyes. Gabriel met her gaze, trying to convey a silent message. No matter what happened, he would not let the Zorgons win. He would fight to his last breath to keep the Nexus out of their hands. But as the mind probe descended towards his face, its needles gleaming in the dim light, Gabriel knew that his resolve was about to be tested like never before. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and he was the only one who could tip the scales. He closed his eyes and braced himself for the pain to come. Gabriel glared at Zaan, his mind racing as he weighed his options. He couldn't let Talon die, but surrendering the Nexus would doom the galaxy. With a deep breath, he made his choice. "I challenge you, Zaan," Gabriel declared, his voice steady. "A duel for Talon's life and the Nexus. You win, they're yours. I win, you let her go." Zaan's eyes glinted with cruel amusement. "You dare challenge me, human? I have slain countless warriors in single combat." "Then this should be easy for you," Gabriel retorted, dropping into a fighting stance. Zaan lunged forward with blinding speed, his fists hammering into Gabriel's guard. Gabriel countered with a flurry of strikes, his augmented strength matching Zaan's blow for blow. As they fought, Ymir and the rebels made their move. They crept through the shadows of the Zorgon camp, silently dispatching the guards. Talon strained against her bonds, her heart pounding as she watched Gabriel and Zaan battle. Gabriel ducked under a vicious haymaker and drove his knee into Zaan's gut, doubling him over. But Zaan recovered quickly, sweeping Gabriel's legs out from under him. They grappled on the ground, trading punishing blows. Gabriel's vision blurred as Zaan's elbow smashed into his temple. Just as Zaan's hands closed around Gabriel's throat, a plasma bolt seared through the air, striking Zaan in the shoulder. He roared in pain and rolled away. Talon stood over them, a stolen plasma rifle in her hands. "Surrender, Zaan, it's over!" Zayan snarled, but with Ymir and the rebels surrounding him, he had no choice. He raised his hands in defeat. "This isn't over," Zaan spat as Gabriel hauled him to his feet. "The Nexus holds the key to a power beyond your comprehension. With it, the Zorgons will be unstoppable." Gabriel's blood ran cold at Zaan's words. He turned to Ymir, who held the Nexus in his hands. "No," Talon argued, stepping forward. "We can use it against the Zorgons, free my people from their tyranny." Before they could decide, a deep rumble shook the ground. Gabriel looked up to see a massive Zorgon fleet filling the sky, weapons powering up. A hologram of Xandar flickered to life before them. "Gabriel Collins," he sneered. "I should have known you'd survive. Surrender the Nexus and the traitor Ymir, or I will burn this world to ash." Gabriel's mind raced, desperate for a plan. His eyes fell on the Nexus glowing softly in Ymir's hands. A swirling portal tore open in the sky above them, a gateway to a distant galaxy. Gabriel knew that the Zorgons had never been able to conquer this realm, had never even found a way inside. He opened a comm channel, broadcasting on all Earth Defense Force frequencies. "This is Captain Gabriel Collins," he said, his voice firm. "Xandar is a traitor, and the Zorgons are behind this war. I have proof. Sending it to you now." He uploaded Ymir's data on the Zorgons' manipulations. The truth of their schemes laid bare for all to see. Xandar's hologram sputtered with rage. "You fool, you have no idea what you've done." "I know exactly what I've done," Gabriel said coldly. "I've given us a fighting chance." He turned to his team, to Talon and Ymir and the rebels who had fought beside him. "Get ready," he said as the Zorgon fleet descended on their position. "This is going to be one hell of a fight." As the Zorgon fleet unleashed a relentless barrage of plasma fire, the planet's surface erupted into chaos. Gabriel and his team sprinted through the rocky terrain, pulse rifles blazing as they cut down wave after wave of Zorgon warriors. The air crackled with the searing heat of energy weapons and the deafening roar of explosions. Ymir ducked behind a jagged boulder, his face lined with sweat and grime. He fiddled with the Nexus, his eyes widening as he realized its true potential. "Gabriel," he shouted over the din of battle. "The Nexus! It can amplify the portal, send the entire Zorgon fleet to another galaxy." Gabriel fired off a burst of plasma bolts, vaporizing a charging Zorgon soldier. "How?" "We need more power," Ymir explained, his voice strained. "More than the Nexus can provide alone." Gabriel's stomach dropped. Using the planet's core would tear the world apart, killing everyone and everything on it. He looked at Talon and Ymir, his friends, his comrades in arms. They had fought by his side through hell and back. How could he ask them to sacrifice themselves? But the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. If the Zorgons succeeded here, countless billions would suffer and die. With a heavy heart, Gabriel made his choice. "Ymir, Talon, get to the ships. Evacuate as many rebels as you can." His voice was firm, unyielding. "I'll stay behind. Activate the portal. Send these bastards to the other side of the universe." Ymir grabbed Gabriel's arm. "You can't! It's suicide!" Gabriel met his friend's gaze, his jaw set with determination. "Go, that's an order." Talon looked like she wanted to argue, but the hard look in Gabriel's eyes brooked no argument. With a final anguished glance, she and Ymir turned and ran, rallying the rebels and herding them towards the waiting ships. Gabriel watched them go, his heart heavy. Then he turned and sprinted towards the planet's core, dodging plasma bolts and leaping over the smouldering corpses of fallen Zorgons. The journey to the core was a gauntlet of fire and blood. Gabriel fought like a man possessed, his rifle spitting death, his fists and feet crushing armor and bone. The Zorgons came at him in a never-ending tide, but he would not be stopped, could not be stopped. At last, he reached the core, a pulsing nexus of energy that thrummed with barely restrained power. Gabriel lifted the nexus, preparing to merge it with the core and activate the portal. "Gabriel!" a voice roared behind him. He spun, rifle raised. Xandar stood before him, his armor scorched and dented, his eyes blazing with mad fury. "You think you've won, human," Xandar sneered. "You think you can defeat the Zorgon Empire?" Gabriel smiled grimly. "I don't have to defeat you, Xandar. I just have to send you away." With a roar of rage, Xandar charged, plasma blade flashing. Gabriel met him head-on, rifle blazing. They clashed in a whirlwind of strikes and counter-strikes, moving faster than the eye could follow. Xandar's blade slipped past Gabriel's guard, stabbing deep into his side. Gabriel gasped, pain flooding his body, but he pushed through it, slamming his rifle butt into Xandar's face, shattering his nose. Xandar reeled back, blood pouring down his chin. Gabriel pressed his advantage, hammering blow after blow into the Zorgon's body until, with a final sickening crunch, Xandar collapsed, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. Gabriel staggered, his vision blurring. Blood poured from his wound, soaking his armor. With a trembling hand he lifted the nexus and slotted it into the core. The effect was instant and cataclysmic. The core pulsed, its energy surging through the nexus and out into space. A massive portal tore open in the sky above, a swirling vortex of light and shadow. The Zorgon fleet, caught in the portal's gravitational pull, struggled futilely against the inexorable tide. One by one, the ships were sucked into the vortex, vanishing into the void between galaxies. Gabriel watched, his vision dimming as the last of the Zorgon ships disappeared. The portal collapsed, the nexus shattering into a million glittering shards. The planet shuddered beneath him, the core destabilizing. Cracks raced across the surface, spewing lava and toxic gas. Gabriel stumbled, his legs giving out. He had to get to his ship, had to escape. He dragged himself across the crumbling landscape, every breath an agony. His ship loomed ahead, a battered but beautiful sight. As he reached the ramp, a figure emerged from the shadows. Talon, her face streaked with tears and soot. "You idiot," she whispered, grabbing him and hauling him aboard. "You damned brave idiot." Gabriel smiled weakly as the ramp closed behind them. Talon rushed to the controls, firing up the engines. The planet bucked and heaved, the surface shattering into a million fragments. With a deafening roar, the planet exploded, a blinding flash of light and energy consuming everything in its path. Talon punched the throttle, the ship rocketing away from the dying world. Gabriel lay on the deck, his blood pooling beneath him. He could feel his life ebbing away, his vision narrowing to a single point. But as the darkness closed in, he felt a sense of peace. He had done his duty. He had saved the galaxy. And as the ship hurtled through the silent void of space, he knew that whatever came next he would face it with the same courage and determination that had brought him this far. As the battered gunship limped into the hangar bay of the Romulan space station, Gabriel winced in pain, clutching his side. The adrenaline of battle was fading, and the full extent of his injuries was beginning to make itself known. But there was no time to rest. The Romulan rebels were waiting for them, their faces alight with hope and gratitude. Talon helped Gabriel down the ramp, her arm around his waist. Ymir followed close behind, his eyes scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. As they stepped onto the hangar floor, a cheer went up from the assembled Romulans. They surged forward, pressing in on all sides, their hands reaching out to touch the heroes who had saved them from the Zorgon threat. Gabriel gritted his teeth and forced a smile, shaking hands and accepting thanks. He knew how much this moment meant to the Romulans, how long they had lived under the shadow of Zorgon oppression. But even as he basked in their adulation, his mind was already racing ahead, wondering what new challenges lay in store. He didn't have to wait long to find out. As the crowd began to disperse, a Romulan officer approached, his face grave. "Captain Collins," he said, saluting. "We've received a distress call from a nearby human colony. They're under attack by an unknown alien force." Gabriel frowned, exchanging a glance with Talon and Ymir. "Zorgons?" he asked. The officer shook his head. "We don't think so. The description doesn't match any known Zorgon tactics or technology." Gabriel nodded, his mind already made up. "We'll investigate," he said. "Prep the gunship for launch." Talon stepped forward, her brow furrowed with concern. "Gabriel, you're in no condition to fight. You need medical attention." Gabriel waved her off. "I'll be fine," he said. "If there are humans in danger, we have to help them." Ymir placed a hand on Gabriel's shoulder. "At least let me come with you," he said. "You'll need all the help you can get." Gabriel hesitated, then nodded. All right, but let's make it quick. We don't know how much time we have. As they boarded the gunship and prepared for launch, Gabriel couldn't shake the feeling that this new threat was somehow connected to the Zorgons. He had learned the hard way never to underestimate their cunning or their cruelty. Whatever they were up against, he knew it would take every ounce of skill and courage they possessed to overcome it. The gunship rocketed through space, its engines straining as Gabriel pushed them to their limits. Every second counted, and he was determined not to let the colonists down. As they approached the colony, however, it became clear that they were already too late. The settlement was in ruins, its buildings shattered and burning. The streets were littered with the bodies of colonists, their lifeless eyes staring up at the stars, and swarming over everything like a nightmarish tide were the Klevax. They were insectoid creatures, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming in the firelight. They moved with a speed and agility that was terrifying to behold, their razor-sharp claws and mandibles tearing through flesh and bone with ease. Gabriel had never seen anything like them before, and the sight of them filled him with a primal dread. Talon's voice crackled over the comm. "I'm picking up life signs in the central compound," she said. "A few dozen survivors barricaded inside." Gabriel nodded, his jaw set. "Take us in," he said. "We'll get as many out as we can." But as the gunship descended towards the compound, the Klevax swarmed towards it, their wings buzzing and their claws outstretched. Plasma bolts slammed into the hull, rocking the ship and sending sparks flying from the control panels. Amir cursed, struggling to keep the ship steady. "We're taking too much damage," he shouted. "We have to pull out." Gabriel slammed his fist against the bulkhead, his frustration boiling over. "No," he yelled. "We can't abandon them." But even as he spoke, he knew Ymir was right. The Klevax were too many, too powerful. They had to retreat, regroup, and come up with a new plan. As the gunship pulled away from the colony, Gabriel caught a glimpse of the survivors through the compound's windows. Their faces were pale with fear, their eyes pleading for help. And then he saw Talon, standing alone in the midst of the Klevax swarm, her plasma blades flashing as she fought to buy the colonists time to escape. "Talon!" Gabriel screamed, lunging for the controls. But it was too late. The Klevax overwhelmed her, dragging her down beneath a writhing mass of claws and mandibles. Gabriel watched in horror as she disappeared from view, his heart shattering in his chest. For a moment, he was paralyzed with grief and rage, his mind reeling from the loss, but then, with a surge of desperate determination, he turned to Ymir. Gabriel shook his head, refusing to accept it. "No," he growled. "I won't leave her behind, not again." He turned back to the controls, his mind racing. He had an idea, a desperate gambit that just might work, but he would need Ymir's help to pull it off. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "The Klevax are a hive mind, right? That means they must have a central nexus, a queen or a control node." Ymir nodded slowly, his eyes widening with understanding. "If we can infiltrate the hive and destroy the nexus, we can disrupt their coordination, throw them into chaos," Gabriel finished. "It's our only chance to get Talon out alive." Ymir took a deep breath, then nodded. "All right," he said. "What do you need me to do?" Gabriel's eyes gleamed with grim determination. "I need you to help me disguise myself as one of them," he said. "And then I need you to create one hell of a distraction." Hours later, Gabriel stood at the edge of the Klevax hive, his heart pounding in his chest. He was clad in a crude facsimile of Klevax armor, his face hidden beneath a chitinous mask. Beside him, Ymir fidgeted nervously, his hands clutching a makeshift explosive device. "Remember," Gabriel said, his voice muffled by the mask. "Wait for my signal, then set off the diversion, and whatever happens, don't come after me." Ymir nodded, his eyes filled with fear and resolve. "Good luck," he whispered. Gabriel turned and strode into the hive, his heart hammering in his chest. The tunnels were dark and cramped, filled with the skittering of countless Klevax drones. He forced himself to walk with a steady gait, mimicking the movements of the creatures around him. As he delved deeper into the hive, he began to notice subtle differences in the drones' behavior. Some moved with a sense of purpose, carrying strange, pulsating cocoons on their backs. Others seemed to defer to certain individuals, bowing their heads in submission as they passed. Gabriel's mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan. He had to get Talon out of there, but he couldn't do it alone. He needed a distraction, something to draw the Clivax's attention away from the Queen's chamber. And then, with a suddenness that made him jump, the answer came to him. The explosives that Ymir had brought, the ones they had planned to use to destroy the hive's nexus. If he could set them off at the right moment, it would create the chaos he needed to grab Talon and escape. Taking a deep breath, Gabriel reached for his comm unit, ready to signal Ymir. But before he could do so, he felt a sudden, searing pain in his back. He spun around, his eyes widening in shock, as he saw a Clivax drone standing behind him, its claw dripping with his blood. In an instant, the chamber erupted into chaos. The Clivax guards surged forward, their claws and mandibles flashing in the dim light. Gabriel leaped into action, his pulse rifle blazing as he fought his way towards Talon. But there were too many of them, their strength and speed overwhelming. Gabriel felt himself being driven back, his armor shredding under the onslaught of claws and teeth. He knew he had only seconds before he was torn apart, his mission a failure. And then, with a deafening roar, the explosives detonated. The chamber shook with the force of the blast, the walls crumbling and the ceiling collapsing in a shower of rubble. The Clivax Queen shrieked in agony, her guards scattering in confusion. Gabriel seized his chance. He lunged forward, scooping Talon's limp form into his arms and sprinting for the exit. Behind him, the hive was collapsing, the tunnels filling with debris and the screams of dying Clivax. He burst out into the open air, his lungs burning and his body aching with a dozen wounds. Ymir was waiting for him, his eyes wide with fear and relief. "Gabriel," he shouted, running forward to help. "Thank the gods, I thought you were dead." Gabriel shook his head, his gaze fixed on Talon's pale, unconscious face. "We have to get her back to the ship," he said, his voice ragged. "She needs medical attention now." As they raced back to the gunship, Gabriel's mind was reeling with the implications of what he had seen inside the hive. The Clivax were not just mindless drones, but a highly organized, intelligent species. And they were planning something that threatened not just the Romulans but all of humanity. He knew that this was just the beginning, that the fight against the Clivax would be long and brutal, but as he looked down at Talon's face, at the woman who had fought beside him and saved his life more times than he could count, he knew that he would never stop fighting. Not until the galaxy was safe and the ones he loved were out of danger. The gunship lifted off, its engines roaring as it climbed into the sky. Gabriel sat beside Talon, holding her hand and watching the Clivax hive recede into the distance. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, what new horrors the universe had in store for them, but one thing was certain: they would face them together no matter the cost. Gabriel tore through the dark, twisting tunnels of the Clivax hive, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of Talon's unconscious form pressed against his back as he ran, the acrid stench of the hive filling his nostrils. He could hear the skittering of Clivax drones in the distance, their chittering calls echoing off the slimy walls. He burst into the experimentation chamber, a cavernous room filled with pulsing organic sacs and glowing tanks of viscous fluid. And there, strapped to a pulsating table, was Talon, her face pale and her body writhing in agony. A spindly Clivax scientist loomed over her, a syringe of glowing green serum in its clawed hand. Gabriel raced to Talon's side, ripping away her restraints with desperate strength. But as he lifted her into his arms, he saw the empty syringe lying on the ground, its contents already coursing through Talon's veins. "Talon, stay with me," Gabriel pleaded, cradling her face in his hands. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and filled with pain. A sudden crash echoed through the chamber, as a horde of Clivax warriors burst through the walls, their claws extended and their mandibles dripping with saliva. Gabriel spun, shielding Talon with his body as he opened fire, his pulse rifle tearing through the advancing Clivax with devastating precision. But there were too many, their numbers seeming to multiply with every passing second. Gabriel fell back, his rifle clicking empty as he reached for his last grenade. But before he could pull the pin, a blur of motion caught his eye. It was Talon, rising to her feet with impossible grace, her eyes glowing an eerie green. She moved like lightning, her fists and feet striking with bone-shattering force as she tore through the Clivax ranks. Gabriel watched in awe as she ripped a warrior's head from its shoulders, her face a mask of primal fury. Together they fought their way out of the hive, Talon's newfound strength and speed, making short work of any Clivax foolish enough to stand in their way. But even as they emerged into the harsh light of the planet's surface, Gabriel could see the change in Talon's eyes, the way her movements seemed more machine than woman. Back on the space station, Emir pored over the data he'd extracted from the serum sample, his face lined with worry. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," he said, his voice hushed with reverence and fear. "It's rewriting her DNA, transforming her into something more than human." Gabriel clenched his fists, his mind racing. He knew that every second they delayed, the serum's effects would become more and more irreversible. They needed a cure, and they needed it now. "The Clivax homeworld," Gabriel said, his voice hard with determination. "That's where we'll find the answers we need." Emir nodded, his fingers flying over the console as he worked to harness the Nexus's residual energy. The air crackled with power as a shimmering wormhole burst to life before them, its swirling depths beckoning them onward. Gabriel assembled his team, a handful of battle-hardened Romulan rebels and a squad of human marines, each one ready to lay down their lives for the cause. But as they prepared to embark on their desperate mission, a message blinked to life on the view screen. It was the Earth Defense Force, their faces grim with urgency. The Zorgons had returned, their fleets massing for a final devastating assault on Earth. Gabriel felt a cold knot of fear settle in his gut as he realized the impossible choice that lay before him. Save Talon, the woman he loved, or defend Earth, the home he had sworn to protect. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the weight of that responsibility crashed down on Gabriel's shoulders like a physical force. Gabriel's heart wrenched as he made the fateful decision to save Talon, even as Earth burned under the Zorgon onslaught. With grim determination, he led his team through the shimmering wormhole, emerging into the heart of the Clivax homeworld. The air crackled with energy as swarms of Clivax warriors descended upon them, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming in the harsh light. Gabriel and his team fought their way through the hordes, pulse rifles blazing, as they pushed towards the towering spires of the Clivax research facility. But with every step, Talon's condition deteriorated, the nanites in her blood raging out of control. Suddenly, Talon lashed out with a primal scream, her eyes glowing an eerie green. She slammed a Romulan rebel into a wall, his bones shattering under her enhanced strength. Gabriel rushed to her side, grabbing her arms as she thrashed and snarled. "Talon, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice raw with desperation. "You have to fight it, don't let them win." But Talon couldn't hear him, lost in the maelstrom of the Clivax programming. Gabriel knew he had only one chance to save her. With shaking hands, he pressed the Nexus against her chest, the ancient device pulsing with power. Pain lanced through Gabriel's body as the nanites surged into him, their icy tendrils burrowing into his mind. He gritted his teeth, focusing all his will on the woman he loved. Slowly, painfully, he drew the nanites out of Talon and into himself, absorbing their power even as they threatened to consume him. Talon gasped as the Nexus released her, clarity returning to her eyes. She collapsed into Gabriel's arms, her breath coming in ragged sobs. But Gabriel had no time to comfort her, his own mind reeling under the onslaught of the Clivax programming. With Talon leaning heavily on Emir, Gabriel led the charge into the research facility, his movements jerky and unnatural. The team fought their way through the labyrinthine corridors, Gabriel's newfound Clivax abilities allowing him to hack through security systems with ease. But as they reached the central chamber, They discovered a terrible truth. The Clivax were not the masterminds behind the war, but merely pawns in a much larger game. A holographic projection flickered to life, revealing the true face of their enemy, the Zorgons, a race of conquered species enslaved by a malevolent AI. Gabriel accessed the Zorgon network with his Clivax implants, his mind flooded with images of countless worlds consumed, their populations absorbed into the Zorgon hive mind. He saw Earth burning under a relentless assault, its defenses crumbling before the might of the Zorgon fleet. With a sinking realization, Gabriel knew that he had only one option left. He would use the Nexus to overload the Clivax power core, creating a massive explosion that would wipe out the Zorgon fleet and buy Earth precious time. Talon gripped his hand, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered fiercely. "Not now, not ever." As they raced towards the power core, Gabriel felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had found his purpose, his destiny, and he would fulfill it no matter the cost. Together, they plunged the Nexus into the core, the ancient device blazing with blinding light. The facility shook itself apart, alarms blaring as the core destabilized. Gabriel and Talon held each other tight, their lips meeting in a final, desperate kiss. The explosion consumed them in a heartbeat, a searing wave of energy that vaporized the Zorgon fleet and turned the Clivax homeworld into a smoking ruin. Across the galaxy, the survivors of the Zorgon onslaught emerged from their shelters, blinking in the sudden stillness. They had won a reprieve, but at a terrible cost. The true war was still to come, a conflict that would shake the very foundations of the universe. But for now, they could only mourn the fallen and remember the sacrifice of the man who had given everything to save them all. Gabriel Collins, the hero of the galaxy, was gone. But his legend would endure, a shining beacon of hope in the darkness to come. The survivors returned to their homes, forever changed by the horrors they had witnessed. But they knew that Gabriel's sacrifice had bought them precious time, a chance to prepare for the coming storm. And they would not waste it, for they knew that the fate of the galaxy rested in their hands. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.